I can imagine that when you're living in London, you got to compete when you walk down the street. You go to the underground, you got to compete to get on the train. You get out of the underground, you got to compete for the job that you have. You got to compete on every level. You have to compete. To go to a restaurant, you've got to make a reservation a long way ahead. You've got to have the money. You've almost got to ask your accountant if you can go to the restaurant before you get there. The Melbourne lifestyle isn't like that. Pearl is a restaurant in Church Street in Richmond. It's a restaurant that offers me the opportunity to creatively express myself as far as food is concerned, which is really, really important to me. I was born and bred in a little town called Warrnambool, which is at the other end of the Great Ocean Road in Victoria. We had my family. My dad's a pharmacist in Warrnambool, and every Friday night we used to eat at this one little restaurant. And my dad used to come and join us. He had a break between sort of 6 and 7 o'clock, so we'd go and eat there. There was a guy who ran the restaurant at this time, a German guy who used to drive this John Player Special BMW. This was back in the 80s. And every time I saw him on a Friday night, he'd be coming to work at 6 o'clock at the time we were arriving for dinner. And he'd either have his golf clubs under his arm, or he'd have his tennis gear on. He was just off the tennis court or whatever. And I used to think that this would be an amazing way to live my life. And
did he actually make any money out of it?
No, he didn't make. Oh, I know that now. And I don't arrive to work at 6 o'clock with my tennis racket under my arm. Yeah. I realise now that it's a little bit harder. But at the time it looked really glamorous. By the time I was 15 and 16, getting bored with sitting and eating dinner with my mum and dad, and that became my summer job and my part-time job. Yeah. You know, I worked for nearly a year before I began a year on the weekends before I began my apprenticeship.
But why did you decide to do the apprenticeship? I mean, your father being a pharmacist was
look, I really think that it came down to my mother. My mother used to cook for us all the time, obviously. But the things that I remember most vividly about my mum was that she was an artist. She used to paint with watercolours and pen and inks, and I used to watch this, and I used to sort of jump around behind her, trying to attract her attention. And she just was oblivious to this whole thing. You know, she was so
in her own space.
In her own space. And I used to think, even at that time, God, I hope I discover something like that. That just I'm so absorbed in that I lose all track of time, lose all track of anything else. This restaurant was then bought by a more sophisticated couple, and they used to come down to Melbourne once a week and then arrive back in Warrnambool with a boot full of really interesting things. Whole wheels of parmesan, legs of prosciutto, things that I'd never seen before as a young chef, and that was pretty progressive then. There wouldn't be anybody now who drives to Melbourne to buy a wheel of parmesan and takes it back in their car.
They couldn't bloody afford it.
Yeah, exactly. And that sort of thing was a massive eye opener as far as the produce was concerned. So the couple that I worked with then, and they certainly weren't gurus by any stretch of the imagination, but they really opened my mind. After I was qualified, so when I was 21, I moved to Melbourne, and I worked for 3 or 4 restaurants in Melbourne, and then went to work for Stephanie Alexander. And I worked for Stephanie for 7 years. So I guess
in Hawthorn.
In Hawthorn. Yeah. So I guess that was where she was sort of the first person that showed me the level that you can take the whole thing to. The creative way that she handled Australian ingredients and classic Australian dishes, not that there really are any classic Australian dishes, but this Australian approach to food, I found really intoxicating, and I found that that was what I wanted to do, and she taught me that was to be proud of that whole thing, and not to feel like there was some cultural cringe that you have to go to France to learn how to cook.
When you're creating a dish, what is your philosophy?
I guess it's a much lighter style of cooking. We don't make very many. There's no reduced sort of sauces here. There is a lot of much stronger emphasis on fruit and vegetable-based sort of sauces that we use at the menu. It's definitely lighter. I definitely like, as far as my food is concerned, for each of the dishes to have a cultural integrity, and I don't
What
like
do you
this.
mean by that?
Okay, I don't like
Because
this
if you're
concept
saying-
I don't like this concept of fusion food.
Confusion
really,
food, right.
confusion. You know, this train smash sort of attitude. If the inspiration from a dish has sort of Chinese origins, then I want that to run all the way through the dish, and I'm not going to then sneak I don't know, pasta into a Chinese sort of dish, you know.
Yeah, but that's where pasta came from.
Well, maybe pasta's not a good example. Maybe pasta's not a good example, but I'm not. If I've got a Thai dish on the menu, I want it to have the integrity of that. My menu meanders through countries all around the world, and it's multicultural, just like I think Australia is. It's layered with influences from everywhere, but things sit sort of fairly happily, and I think that that's what Melbourne is. There are pockets and enclaves within Melbourne, whether it's Victoria Street and Vietnamese stuff, whether it's whether it's Chinatown. One of the reasons why the handbrake sort of went on with restaurants in Melbourne was because there were too many owner, chef, operators who didn't really have the skills to run the restaurant. They were great chefs, but they didn't necessarily have the skills to run the restaurant. They got used to not making any money out of their businesses, and they were happy to do that because they felt, I'm opening my own restaurant. This is what I do. You know, they run the restaurant. They run the business out of a shoebox. You know, and there's no the same creative systems that they have to work in the kitchen weren't applied in the office where it really needs to be applied. So I think that not all of the people who came from outside the hospitality industry into the hospitality, not all of them are good, but I think we really needed that. We really needed that flushing out. We really needed to understand that with the same attention to detail in the kitchen was needed in the office, just as we realised it was needed in the wine department. This tyranny of distance and this isolation that we have breeds this special kind of character that Australians have, that you need to suck the marrow out of every chance you get to go to London or every chance you get to go to New York. You have to suck every moment of that out. You're on the internet, you're buying CDs, you're buying books, you know. There is a very Australian nature to have that sort of great desire for knowledge, that great desire for travel, and the feeling that we've got to go out and search for it ourselves. It's not going to just come to us. And maybe if you're in a great city like London or New York, where the best of the best is there anyway, and everybody wants to come in there.
You can take it for granted, in other words.
But then it creates this really dog-eat-dog sort of environment, I think, as well. And, you know, Melbourne is a lot more comfortable and a lot more livable and a lot more easier to negotiate on all sorts of different levels.